Substitute, Episode 9. 22 criminals tasted unexpected freedom today after the president signed a pardon for non-violent offenders. This action forms part of the president's initiative to reform the nation's justice system and decongest crowded prisons. One beneficiary of this pardon is Jedediah Olumegbon, a 34-year-old suspect whose alleged involvement in the murder of a narcotic agent 2 years ago has raised criticism from the public. Edem and Jedediah's pictures shared the television screen. Before his murder, Edem Achibong served the Drug Enforcement Agency for 13 years. He carried out several arrests and seizure of tons of illegal drugs, including marijuana fields, linked to several drug cartels. The presenter paused. We are now being joined by barrister Olusegun Ibiyemi, who is a civil rights activist. Paul's phone began to ring. He could hear the barrister go on about the legal implication of releasing criminals back into the society. Why didn't you tell me? It was Mabel, Edem's widow. Paul felt a slight heaviness in his stomach. I'm so sorry about this, Mabel. It also came to us as a surprise, and we have been trying to fight it, but it looks like what the government wants? The government. Mabel's voice shook as she spoke. Who is the government? Is this the same government that my husband slaved for even to the point of death? Edem died because of what he believed. Those people murdered him in cold blood, and no one seems to care. She broke into sobs as Paul closed his eyes, wishing he could offer some assuring words, but he was drained, as this whole episode has been one big emotional roller coaster. How do I tell Ivana? How do I explain that her father was murdered and justice was never served to his killers? After some minutes of whispering through sobs, she finally paused and drew a deep breath. We are leaving the country. Paul raised his forehead. Where are you going? It will be best to move abroad. Most of my family members are there anyway, and I need to be around them. When Paul ended the call, he flung his phone aside. Mabel was right. The system had failed them again. Paul appeared in court to testify against Mike Fetuga the next day, the man who was suspected to own the truckload of illegal drugs confiscated during their previous raid. Despite the glaring evidences, the case took a different turn when one of his wives showed up in court to testify against him. As Paul drove back to the office that afternoon, the news of Jedediah's freedom filled all the radio stations. Several broadcasters analyzed the implication of releasing criminals back into the society, especially a hardened one like Jedediah. Paul had to turn the radio off in disgust. He dialed Ekene, his younger colleague, who worked with him during the last operation. How far? He asked. I dropped it off, but you have to be... Ekene started to say, but Paul cut in. Sure. I just needed to verify something, that's all. He said, are you coming back to investigations unit? Ekene asked, I'm not sure, but I need to move this case beyond just appearing in court as a mere witness. Yes, boss, I understand. Ekene was always dependable, even if it meant breaking protocol to favor him, and Paul appreciated that. His phone rang. It was Lara calling to see how he was coping with the news surrounding Jedediah. She hoped that he did not think her father was behind it. Lara, I understand this was beyond your father. So what are you going to do? Our lawyers at the agency are trying to appeal Jedediah's release. We have pointed out that he is a violent offender contrary to what they say, so we need to give enough evidences. I'm so worried about you, Lara confessed. No, don't be. I'll be fine. Paul sounded brighter compared to his mood the previous days. How was your day in court? Hectic. Fetuga's wife showed up to testify against him, so the case took a different turn and it was adjourned. Wow! Now, we need to gather more evidence before his next court appearance. We also need to track down his business associates and... Paul paused. It suddenly occurred to him that putting more effort to trace all of Fetuga's business associates could bring them closer to nailing the man rather than depending on existing evidence. This meant that the adjournment was not a bad thing. His mind started to go in 1,000,001 directions. "Baby, please can I call you back?" he asked. "Yes, but before you go, I was wondering if you would be available this evening to view a new office space with me?" Paul grinned. "You found a space? In a nice location, but I need a second opinion at this point. Do you think you can spare some time to..." Sure. Paul did not let her finish. "Just text me the details. Okay, love you." "Yeah, love you too, baby." As soon as the call ended, Paul phoned Ejembi, who was also in court earlier that morning. "Hello, sir." Ejembi's firm voice ran through the speaker of his phone. "Are you still in court?" Just wrapping up some paperwork. I was just about to call you though." Ejembi sounded like he had some information to aid the case. "What's up?" Paul asked. "My guys have been able to trace some previous phone calls from Fetuga's phone to drug dealings with another drug lord. Although they are working on getting more details, but I think it looks promising." Good, but how do we..." "The truck of illegal drugs is suspected to belong to Fetuga, so if we can link these call details to the transaction, then it could lead to more evidences to nail them both," Ejembi said. Paul nodded. He always loved Ejembi's optimism. He was one colleague who had the same work ethics as himself. "Any ideas on who this drug baron may be?" "We suspect it may be Tiger." Tiger! Paul had heard that name too many times in 1 week. A notorious and faceless criminal with tons of business associates and subordinates who ran his cartel and raked several billions of naira annually. "As you know, this Tiger guy is very sleek. It will take a well-established case to bring him down. No one knows what the man looks like, where he lives, and how to pin him down." Paul nodded. He was conversant with the Tiger story because he had studied the man's character and mode of operation for almost 5 years now, working with his team month after month to gather enough evidence to put him behind bars, but it never worked out. If they could prove that Tiger was associated with Fetuga, then it could be an opportunity to finally nail him. "I thought we had an informant in his cartel." "Yes! He's been helpful in the past, but I haven't been able to reach him in the last couple of weeks, and I am not sure why," Ejembi said. "Keep trying. I believe we will be a few steps closer to nailing this guy called Tiger." "Yes, sir." Ejembi knew as much as Paul did that it would take a lot to make Tiger fall into their trap. But what he was not sure of was if Fregeni knew that Paul was getting more and more involved with investigative duties again. "Is Fregeni aware you are..." "No worries about that. I need you and your team to give this your best shot. Everyone needs to be on their toes. We have 3 weeks to Fetuga's next court appearance, and it would be awesome to get our evidences in before that time," Paul said. "I agree." "Take care then. Bye." As Paul turned into the road leading to the office, he wondered how people could engage in drug crimes when it was obvious that when caught, they would end up in jail. A typical drug dealer had a high chance of being killed. Other dangerous jobs, like being a soldier, were far less risky. The money was probably tempting, but in the long run, he did not think it was not worth it. His secretary greeted him as soon as he stepped into the office. "Welcome, sir. How was court?" For a matured woman in her late 40s, Stella was as detailed as a map, so Paul admired her. "Thank you, Stella." Paul headed towards his office as she followed him. "Fregene called. He said you should call him as soon as you return." "Okay." Paul signaled to the brown envelope in her hand. "Ekene dropped this for you." She handed over the envelope, which contained an obvious pile of bonded sheets. "I had wanted to register it, but he insisted that..." "It's fine. Any other thing? Paul wanted to have some quiet time after the long hours in court. Your mother called. Really? She said you should find time to call her back because it's urgent. Okay, Stella. He watched her shut his office door and finally leaned his aching back against his upholstered chair. His tired eyes drifted to the wall clock. It was 20 minutes past 3. His stomach churned from a lengthy day without food. Yet he did not feel like putting anything in his mouth. Pressing his lips together, he reached for his desk phone and dialed his boss's extension, Harrison. Good afternoon, sir. Stella told me you. Come to my office now. He met Fregini rounding off a meeting with some of his colleagues, and as soon as they were alone, Paul moved closer to his boss's desk. Good day, sir. Sit down. How are you? Fregini's question was awkward, and it came as a pleasant surprise, although it felt good to know that his boss realized he was going through a tough time at work. The previous days had been challenging, as every other thing he noticed about the agency. Paul licked his lips before responding. I'm fine, sir. I hear you have been dabbling into some investigative duties again, he said, and Paul's front showed he had not seen it coming, but Fregini continued softly. Is there anything you would like to tell me? The old man asked as Paul began to stutter. Well, it's nothing, sir, he said. Are you flouting my orders? Paul shook his head before gathering himself to give a proper response. With all due respect, sir, I was at the forefront of Fetuga's arrest, and I'm sure that if we go about his case tactically, we could pin Tiger down too. As Paul explained, Fregini nodded. In his 40 years of working for the agency, he had seen many officers become obsessed with capturing criminals, so Paul's behavior was not strange. The downside, however, was that it sometimes blurred their judgment over other issues. So this is about Tiger? The old man asked. It's about the agency, sir. Paul replied. Apart from appearing as a witness in court, I need you to put away whatever thing you are working on with Fetuga and focus on your new duties. Fregini's tone was icy. Paul looked around uneasily. But sir, No buts, Fregini interrupted. But I'm one of the witnesses. It's my responsibility, Paul argued. Fregini drummed his fingers on his desk. Your responsibility is to present the agency as an institution that creates awareness on the dangers of consuming illegal substances, and for now you are to focus on that. His bosses stated, Is that clear? Paul released a deep sigh. Now, concerning Jedediah's case, I know we agreed to pursue an appeal as an organization, but right now it's beyond us, and they have instructed us to drop the case. Paul struggled to find the right words, but he could not. Instead, he felt a sudden lump at the back of his throat, which soon translated into an overwhelming sensation of misery. He sat there blank and motionless until he finally found his tongue. Why? He asked. Don't ask me any questions because I don't have the luxury to ask my superiors such questions. I just act on instructions. Fregini leaned closer. Leave it alone. It's a presidential pardon, and an appeal is worthless, he said. A million thoughts flew through Paul's mind as he stared at his boss. Okay, sir. He stood and turned to leave the room. The war is not over, Fregini said as Paul paused and faced him. I believe this Jedi guy was freed because of some special assignment he has to carry out for his cartel, he said. But Paul did not bother to ask how Fregini knew, because the man was always informed. His face was now relaxed, and he wore a grin that seemed to convey secret knowledge. We need to keep a tab on Jedi and his network. If he makes any mistakes, or if caught with any illegal substances, he will be back in jail, and this time it will be for a long time. But like I said, the investigation team will handle it. Fregini sighed and added, I'll be traveling to Kano tomorrow for a meeting. I'll see you when I return. Okay, sir. When Paul slumped into his seat, he felt a slight headache, but he did not think too much of it. Paul's mind kept spinning in different directions until the sound of his ringing phone distracted him. It was his mother. "How are you, my dear?" It was consoling to hear her sonorous voice. "I'm fine, Mama, and you?" he said. "I watched the release of that criminal over the news. Is it possible he would escape the wrath of the law just like that?" Well, Paul thought about his encounter with his boss. I don't know, honestly. He really did not know what else to say or do. "I worry about you a lot. Please be careful." Imwe understood the risk. Her son exposed himself, and Paul knew she was afraid that if he got shot, they could set his murderer free too. "Thanks, Mama. The message I got from my secretary left me slightly worried. Are you okay?" "Something has been bothering me," Imwe said. Paul knew his mother enough to sense that it was about Austin. Occasionally he reassured her. Other times, he reminded her it was pointless to worry over a grown man, particularly when it was clear that the person in question did not care about them. "I had a terrible dream last night, and I think Austin is in danger," Imwe started to say, and Paul shook his head. He had more than enough on his plate to bother about his mother's premonitions, but he did not rebut her claims. Instead, he listened as she narrated her dream. "I saw a lot of people chasing him, and he was running. He was running so fast, and then suddenly they pushed him into a pit." "A pit?" Paul shook his head in disbelief. His mom was becoming paranoid over Austin after all the guy existed before he showed up in their lives. So what was all this talk about safety and a pit? "Paul, we need to pray for God's protection upon Austin's life." There was a deep sense of urgency in his mother's voice, but it was difficult for Paul to share her opinion. "Mama, Austin is an adult, and I believe he is safe wherever he is." "That's the question, Paul. Where exactly is he?" Imwe asked. "We don't even know if he returned to Lagos or he went back to Delta. We don't know if he has gotten entangled in some dangerous situation. How do we reach him when we don't have an address or phone number?" "Mama, I bet you are worrying over nothing." Paul gathered some documents. "I called you to intercede with me on his behalf." "Mama, Paul started to say, but she cut him short. "I already know what your answer will be," she said. It was clear his mother was resorting to emotional blackmail. "I will pray with you, but I don't think you should bother your head over it," he assured. "Do you have a number you can reach him on?" "A what?" "A phone number." "No, I don't," he replied. "And you don't feel strange about it? Your own twin brother, born on the same day with you." "Mama, I don't like the way you are going about this. Why do you like to bother yourself over something which you have no control over? Is it my fault he wants none of us to contact him? At least if he did, then he would let us know where he is." Paul's intercom rang at that point. It was Stella. He lifted the receiver to his other ear. "Yes." His voice was quick. "Mrs. Ayola is here." "Mrs. Ayola." Paul was blank. "From the state school board. She said you asked her to come in for a meeting at..." "Oh!" Mrs. Ayola was the head of the state school board, and they had scheduled an appointment to discuss an upcoming seminar. She requested for a late-hour meeting because her mornings were busy with supervisory duties, and Paul had obliged her. Only, it skipped his mind. He could hear his mother still talking at the other end of the line. "Let her come in," he instructed, and then turned to his mobile phone. "Mama, let me talk to you later." "Paul, later, please, Mama." "Okay." Imwe resigned. Mrs. Ayola was a bulky woman with a queer fashion sense. She tied her head from ear to ear and entered his office with a pile of documents and her large handbag. The agency had done some past collaboration with the state schools, but they now wanted to see what more they could do in running more youth programs. "Good evening, Mr. Harrison," she greeted with a grim face. "Welcome, Ma." Paul stood to his feet as they shook hands. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "Same here," He ushered her to a seat. It looked like it would be a long evening. Lara paced the length and breadth of the room for the 5th time. The walls were covered with glass, and it was a functional space that seemed perfect for what she had in mind. She could already see the possibility of setting up a proper reception, a larger tailoring and design area which could accommodate more sewing machines, and a lounge where her clients could relax while waiting. The 100 square meter proposed office space was situated in the heart of town, on the 2nd floor of a busy shopping complex with an excellent view of the city. Lara walked through the glass doors into the wide balcony, and a gust of wind eased past her as she relished the sights and sounds of the surrounding streets, a typical urban kaleidoscope of structures, heavy traffic flowing up and down the busy street, city buses and crowded bus stops, activities of shoppers winding down as the sun began to set, and the nearby street lights confirmed it would only be a short while before business activities came to a halt. "Are we still waiting for your boyfriend?" the property agent asked. He was a straight-faced guy with a stocky build. Lara glanced over her wrist. They had waited for an hour already, during which the agent showed her around, answered her question, and addressed her concerns. It would not have hurt to have a second opinion, as Paul was apt in pointing out tiny details, and that was why she needed his help. She exhaled and reached for her phone, but Paul's phone rang and rang with no response. She dialed his number again, and this time he answered at the 2nd ring. "Hey!" Lara sighed in relief at the sound of his voice. "Hello, where are you?" she asked. "No?" Paul hummed. "Are you almost here?" "Where?" Paul did not seem to have a clue of what she meant. Lara felt her heart sink. "We were supposed to view a property together. You asked me to send you the address this afternoon, remember?" she said. "Oh, I'm sorry. I had a meeting that ran late." Paul gasped. The meeting with Mrs. Ayula had just rounded off, and he was back at his desk, finishing up some paperwork before calling it a day. "You are still in the office?" Lara's eyes caught the estate agent, who had been waiting for more than an hour. "Let me clear my desk. I will meet you up shortly." No, there's no point. "I'm sorry, baby. I can't believe I forgot." "It's okay." Lara tried to control her tone. "I'll talk to you later," she said as she ended the call, and shook her head at the thought that Paul was never available for anything but his work. "Is he still coming?" the estate agent asked, even when he had eavesdropped on her telephone conversation. "Send me the details of the contract. I will make the transfer tomorrow." The man's face brightened. He was thrilled to close the deal. The Kano Zonal office was winding down, with activities following the concluded national meeting of zonal directors. That morning, senior officers of the agency dispersed to return to their various commands after a 2-day meeting. The office was a focal point for all other offices in the north, and they had seen their own fair share of challenges. Officer Adelik lifted his oval face towards his colleague and friend. His wide forehead blended with the fullness of his cheekbones as he laughed. Officers sometimes found humor in recounting recent incidents on the job, as it kept them sane and eased the work tension. That morning was not any different as the two men sat sharing a joke over breakfast in the staff cafeteria. It was a partly furnished space with a few benches and tables, and the place was almost empty except for a young officer who sat engrossed in a telephone conversation near the door. Fregeni gulped down his tea. It would only be a few minutes before he had to head back to his base in Port Harcourt. "To be honest, I don't regret not signing the petition against Wariboko," Adeleke said. "I agree he had a rough start, but the man seems to navigate the agency in the right direction. For instance, he got the Senate to approve the recruitment of recruits after so many years." Adeleke's weathered hands enveloped a slice of bread as he spoke. "You are right," Fregene agreed. It was no longer news that they were short-staffed, but with the recruits scheduled to graduate from the training academy in another week, that problem could be eased. The various zones now waited in anticipation for their share of new hands. Our retirement is in a few years and we need good successors to continue this war. Otherwise, there will be nothing left. Adeleke was right. We will survive, Fregene replied. He preferred to stay optimistic about the whole situation, but he felt a need to share with his friend a thought that had entered his mind. I have this subordinate who studied criminology abroad and is frustrated half the time because he can't understand how things work. Fregene said, "How long has he been with us?" Adeleke raised a portion of fried eggs into his wide mouth. Long enough, but he is very zealous and believes he can do it all. The men giggled. Tell the lad to calm down, otherwise he will burn out. Adeleke advised and added, You know as much as I do that this job requires tact and wisdom. You can't take decisions without thinking, and you must be willing to adapt to change. Absolutely. Fregene nodded. A case was transferred to us last week from Sokoto Command. A young man was arrested while attempting to cross the border, and according to immigration, they found 500 grams of cocaine stashed away in the soles of his designer shoes. Fregene swung his bald head from side to side, and after painting the scenario in his mind's eye, his wrinkled nose gave way to a hearty laughter. That's an unbelievable 250 grams for each shoe. So much weight for the legs, he said. Well, he pulled it off until they arrested him, but that's not even the point. This guy agreed to cooperate at first, so we started with all the witness protection modalities. But suddenly, we bring him to Kano and he changes his mind. Adeleke could not hide his frustration. Now tell me, am I supposed to shoot myself in the head as a result of such disappointment? Who does he work for? Fregene pressed a paper towel gently over his lips. The guy won't say, but we suspect he works for a certain drug lord named Tiger, and we plan to charge him to court this following week. Fregene clasped his bony hands together and inched closer. There are indications. Tiger controls the entire distribution for West Africa. He murdered an officer and recently had the effrontery to pull one of his men out of custody. So if we can bring him down with this, then why not? But the guy has refused to cooperate. They stood to leave the cafeteria. Nonsense! Can I see him? Fregene requested as the two aged men strode through the corridors of the office block that led to the interrogation room. I need you to sing like a bird. Agent Mohammed Ismail stood grinding his teeth. A visible vein throbbed in his forehead, and although Austin was exhausted from several weeks of interrogation, he refused to budge. Are you prepared to lead us to your boss? Mohammed asked, as Austin started to cough, then looked away, but Mohammed raised his voice. Talk! That minute, Adeleke and Fregene walked into the room, and as soon as Fregene saw Austin, he froze. Fregene's hands were tucked into his trouser pockets as he took some calculated steps towards the young guy and lifted his chin so that their eyes locked. What's your name? Fregene asked. Austin Osagi, he muttered. Adelek's gaze shifted from the criminal to his colleague, who looked like he had encountered a ghost. Is there a problem? Adeleke asked, but Fregene did not respond.
Thanks for watching. This story was written by Uduak, Edet and produced by Tconcepts.